Dramatic turn in the story of John Walsh. As you know, he's made a career out of helping police solve crimes on his TV show America's Most Wanted. But there was one case he couldn't crack, the murder of his own son, Adam. Now, more than a quarter century after this.
His name was Adam. Adam John Walsh. He was 6 years old. He had sandy blonde hair and a smile that his mother once described as the kind that made you feel like the whole room had gotten brighter. He loved baseball. He loved the water. He loved his mom and his dad more than anything in the world. And on a Monday morning in the summer of 1981, on what should have been just another ordinary day, he went to a shopping mall in Hollywood, Florida, and he never came home. What followed his disappearance was one of the most heartbreaking, infuriating, and ultimately transformative stories in the history of this country. A story about a little boy who deserved protection. A story about a system that failed him, before, during, and after. A story about a father so consumed by grief and rage and love that he turned his pain into a weapon, and used it to protect millions of children he would never meet. And a story that took 27 years to reach anything resembling an answer. This is the story of Adam Walsh. Oh, understand what was lost on July 27, 1981, you have to understand what was there before. The Walsh family, John, Revé, and their only child, Adam, lived in Hollywood, Florida. John Walsh was a hotel developer with ambition and energy. Revé was devoted and warm. And Adam, born November 14, 1974, was the center of their universe. He was 6 years old. He was the kid at the baseball diamond who swung with everything he had, even when he missed. He was the boy at the beach who ran straight into the waves without hesitation. He was the child who, according to everyone who knew him, made you feel like the world was still a fundamentally good place. On July 27, 1981, Revé Walsh took Adam with her on a shopping errand to the Sears department store at the Hollywood Mall. She needed a lamp. She left Adam in the toy department, just a few aisles away, where he had found a crowd of older kids clustered around a video game console. He was playing. He was happy. She was gone for minutes. When she came back, Adam was not there. She called his name. Once. Twice. Moving through the aisles, her voice getting louder, her heartbeat getting faster. She asked a clerk. She checked the bathroom. She went to the entrance, scanning the parking lot, shielding her eyes from the Florida sun. Nothing. An announcement was made on the store's intercom system. His name, Adam Walsh, echoed through the department store, bouncing off fixtures and mannequins and shoppers who barely looked up. No answer. The police were called. A helicopter search was launched. Dozens of officers combed the mall and surrounding area. For days in, they had hit a wall. And Revé and John Walsh appeared on Good Morning America, the grief already carving itself into their faces, and begged America to help find their son. "He's our only child," John said, his voice shaking. "Here is something that, in the year 2025, sounds almost incomprehensible." When Adam Walsh disappeared in 1981, when a 6-year-old child vanished from a public shopping mall in broad daylight, his parents could not enter his information into the FBI's National Crime Information Computer. The NCIC, as it was known, was the most comprehensive national database of criminal and missing persons information in the country. It stored records of stolen cars, stolen guns, stolen boats, stolen planes, but not stolen children. There was no missing children's file. There was no unidentified deceased child file. There was nothing. John Walsh later described the moment he was told this, the moment a federal agent explained that the law did not require the FBI to enter a missing child's information into its own national database, as one of the most enraging moments of his life. "You could enter information about a stolen car," he would say years later, his voice still crackling with disbelief. "But not a stolen child." The Hollywood Police Department, to its credit, assembled a significant search operation. But they were, by their own later admission, overwhelmed. Mistakes began piling up almost immediately. Evidence was mishandled. Leads were not followed up quickly enough. Key investigative opportunities closed before detectives could reach them. It took a full week after Adam's disappearance for the FBI to get formally involved. 1 week. A 6-year-old child. 7 days. And the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world was not formally in the case. 16 days after Adam Walsh disappeared from the Hollywood Mall on August 10, 1981, 2 fishermen were working a drainage canal off the Florida Turnpike near Vero Beach in Indian River County. The canal was more than 100 miles from Hollywood. 100 miles. The fishermen found something in the water. It was Adam's severed head. He had been decapitated. His body, the rest of him, was never found. He was 6 years old. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think we sometimes rush past the horror of it in our hurry to get to the investigation and the legal proceedings and the case file. A 6-year-old boy. Someone's child. Someone who, 14 days earlier, was playing video games in a department store on a summer morning. Found in a canal. 100 miles from home. Without his body. The child's body was never found. John Walsh received the news that afternoon. He said later that his health spiraled, in his words, down into hell. He lost 30 pounds. He said he lost the will to live. He was a man who had lost his child, and his child had not just died. His child had been taken, violated, and discarded. Whatever came after, all of the advocacy, the television show, the legislation, the captured fugitives, it came from this moment. This phone call. This unbearable August afternoon. It all came from grief so consuming that the only thing left to do with it was burn it into something that would last. Let me tell you about the mistakes. Because they matter. Because they are the difference between a case closed in 1984 and a case closed in 2008. Between a family that could grieve with answers and a family that spent 27 years in a purgatory of not knowing. In the immediate aftermath of Adam's disappearance, Hollywood detectives followed standard investigative procedure and focused first on the people who knew him. Adam's parents were asked to take lie detector tests. Both passed. John had an ironclad alibi, he had been at work, his whereabouts fully documented. Investigators then turned to Jim Campbell, a family friend who had recently ended an extramarital affair with Revé. The theory was that Campbell might have wanted to destabilize the Walsh marriage, or punish them in some way, by hurting their son. Campbell maintained his innocence, passed a polygraph, and was eventually cleared when authorities determined the logistics of the crime made his involvement impossible. The attention on the family in those early weeks was, according to criminal justice experts, standard practice. You start with people who knew the victim. It's just what investigators do. But while investigators were focused inward, the actual perpetrator, a drifter named Otis Toole, was already. When Otis Toole eventually came forward, what investigators found, and then lost, was catastrophic. Toole had been driving a white 1971 Cadillac Sedan DeVille with a damaged right bumper. Investigators tracked it down. They found blood on the front and rear floorboards. They removed the carpeting for testing. DNA testing did not exist in 1983. But even basic blood typing could have provided powerful evidence. The problem? The blood type testing was never completed. And then, in one of the most staggering failures of evidence preservation in American criminal justice history, the bloody carpet was lost. And then the Cadillac itself, the primary physical crime scene, was sold for junk. Gone. The machete that Toole likely used, found at a business he had access to. Tested positive for traces of blood. But the original testing degraded the sample so thoroughly that by the time DNA science arrived to potentially make a definitive match, there was nothing left to test. The car, gone. The carpet, gone. The machete, effectively destroyed. Every piece of physical evidence that could have closed this case in the 1990s was either lost, sold, or made untestable by the very police department that was supposed to preserve it. John Walsh spent years describing the Hollywood PD's investigation as botched. He wrote an entire book about it, Tears of rage, that is one of the most searing indictments of institutional failure ever put to paper. He was right. Otis Elwood Toole. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, in 1947. He grew up in poverty and chaos, in a household marked by abuse, neglect, and, by Toole's own account, profound violence from a very early age. He was, by any clinical measure, a deeply damaged human being. An IQ assessed at 75, placing him in the range of intellectual disability. A history of childhood abuse. A drifter's life spent crossing state lines with fellow criminal Henry Lee Lucas, the two of them leaving behind a trail of confessions to murders that numbered, by their own claims, in the hundreds, most of which law enforcement determined were fabrications. In October 1983, Toole was sitting in a Florida prison, awaiting trial on arson charges. And he started talking. He told an investigator he had kidnapped a boy from a Florida mall and killed him. On October 19, 1983, Hollywood detectives visited Toole. He confessed to killing Adam Walsh. He told them he had seen Adam outside the Sears store after a security guard had ordered a group of kids, including Adam, to leave. He said he had lured the boy with promises of toys and candy. He led detectives to the bus bench outside the Sears. He pointed at it and said, "That's where I found him." He described driving north on Interstate 95 with Adam in the car. He said the boy was, at first, quiet and compliant. Then Adam began to panic. He said Adam cried for his mother. He cried for his mother. He was 6 years old, in a stranger's car, on a Florida highway, and he cried for his mother. Toole told detectives what happened next. How he silenced Adam. How he drove north toward Jacksonville along the Florida Turnpike. How he stopped at a deserted service road near the Indian River County line. How he decapitated the boy with a machete. How he said he wanted to make Adam his adopted son. A statement so chilling in its delusion that it still stops investigators cold decades later. His description of how Adam died, including details about the machete, the number of strikes, the location, matched the autopsy findings in ways that no one outside the investigation could have known. Toole also got things wrong. He described Adam's hair color incorrectly. He got the clothes wrong. He initially claimed Henry Lee Lucas was with him, but Lucas had been in jail in Virginia when Adam disappeared. He recanted on October 26. Then confessed again minutes later. This cycle, confess, recant, would repeat for years. Toole would eventually give more than 24 documented confessions in Adam's case alone. Here is the question that investigators, lawyers, and psychologists spent years trying to answer. Was Otis Toole telling the truth? Or was he a deeply compromised man who had, for reasons of attention or notoriety or pure psychological chaos, confessed to a murder he didn't commit? It is not as simple a question as it sounds. Rod Hovett, a forensic and clinical psychologist, has noted that someone with Toole's level of intellectual disability might be inclined to confess to something he didn't do. Maybe for the attention. Maybe for the sense of importance. Maybe because the line between what he did and what he imagined was blurry in ways the rest of us can't fully access. Toole and his partner Henry Lee Lucas were both, at various points, determined to be unreliable confessors. They admitted to hundreds of murders, many of them verifiably impossible. The FBI and state investigators concluded that most of their confessions were fabrications. But not all. Because here is what makes Otis Toole's confession in Adam's case different from so many of his others. He knew things he shouldn't have known. The description of the decapitation matching the autopsy findings. An August 1991 witness who came forward and told police he had seen Adam get into a Cadillac with a man who looked like Toole, and who independently described a dent on the right bumper of the car, a detail that had never been made public. Toole leading investigators to the bus bench. To the highway. To the bridge. Green shorts and a sandal matching what Adam was wearing, found at Toole's Jacksonville home. And then, at the very end of his life, in 1996, as he was dying of cirrhosis and AIDS in a Florida prison cell, Toole's own niece said her uncle made a deathbed confession to killing Adam. A deathbed confession. Hovett points out something important about that. At that point, there is nothing to gain. No attention to court. No notoriety to claim. A man who is dying, who knows he is dying, who has no reason to lie, confessing to the murder of a 6-year-old boy. At the moment of death, Otis Toole said, "I killed Adam Walsh." In July 1991, the world learned about Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer operating out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 17 known victims. A history of crimes so grotesque they are still, 3 decades later, almost impossible to fully process. But here is what is less widely known. In 1981, Jeffrey Dahmer was living in Florida. And after Dahmer's arrest, witnesses began coming forward to tell police that they had seen him at the Hollywood Mall on the day Adam Walsh disappeared. In August 1992, Hollywood detectives traveled to Wisconsin to interview Dahmer in prison. Dahmer denied killing Adam. Investigators believed him, partly because of behavioral profiling. Serial killers typically have consistent age ranges and gender preferences in their victims. Dahmer's known victims were all between 14 and 32 years old. Criminal psychologists say it's possible, but statistically very unlikely. Serial killers don't typically make such radical deviations. And yet, the doubt lingered in some corners of the community. Some residents of Hollywood, Florida, and members of true crime communities still believe to this day that the evidence against Dahmer was stronger than authorities acknowledged. The 2 pieces of evidence that could have settled the question definitively. Toole's bloodstained carpet and the Cadillac were lost. We will never have DNA proof. The case was closed without it. And that gap, that space where certainty should be, is a direct consequence of the Hollywood Police Department's catastrophic mishandling of the evidence. John Walsh lost 30 pounds. He said he lost the will to live. He said he was dying of a broken heart. And then he did something extraordinary. He got up. He got up, and he fought. He and Revé threw themselves into advocacy with a ferocity that was, in retrospect, almost terrifying in its intensity. They lobbied Congress. They testified. They traveled. They appeared on television over and over and over again. Not because they had healed, but because they had decided that if they were going to survive this, they were going to make it mean something. In 1982, just 1 year after Adam's murder, Congress passed the Missing Children Act, mandating that the FBI add information about missing children to the National Crime Information Center database. The change John Walsh had been told was impossible. Stolen children, finally given the same standing in the federal system as stolen cars. John and Revé founded the Adam Walsh Outreach Center, which grew into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that has, in the decades since, helped recover tens of thousands of missing children. Children whose faces went on milk cartons, that was Adam. Children whose photos appeared on shopping bags and mailbox flyers, that was Adam. Fingerprinting programs in schools. Increased security in stores and public spaces. Missing persons units at police departments across the country. All of it, every single piece of it, grew from the seed of Adam's death and his parents' refusal to let that death be meaningless. And then, in 1988, John Walsh walked onto a television set and launched America's Most Wanted on Fox. The show ran for decades. It helped law enforcement capture more than 1,100 dangerous fugitives. It helped recover dozens of missing children. It is credited with helping catch at least 17 of the FBI's most wanted criminals. John Walsh, a hotel developer from Hollywood, Florida, who just wanted his son back, became one of the most effective weapons against violent crime that America had ever produced. And the whole time, he didn't know who had killed Adam. He said in an interview that he believed it was Toole. He said he had believed it for years. But belief and knowing are different things. The not knowing was its own kind of wound that would not close. Let me walk you through the years, because they matter. 1981, Adam disappears. The investigation begins. the evidence starts to be mishandled. 1983, Otis Toole confesses. The Hollywood police have their man, but the Florida state attorney can't prosecute without physical evidence. The carpet is lost. The case drifts. 1984 to 1990, Toole cycles between confessions and retractions. The investigation lurches. Other suspects are considered and cleared. 1991. A witness finally comes forward who saw Adam get into a Cadillac with a dented bumper matching Toole's vehicle. The same year, Jeffrey Dahmer is arrested in Wisconsin, and suddenly a new suspect is in the frame. 1992, Hollywood detectives interview Dahmer in prison. He denies it. They believe him. 1995, DNA testing has become viable. Investigators want to test the bloody car mats from Toole's Cadillac. The car mats are gone. The Cadillac is gone. The machete's blood traces have been destroyed by the original tests. Everything that could now give them certainty has been lost by the very department supposed to protect it. 1996, Otis Toole dies in prison. Cirrhosis. AIDS. Age 49. Still serving 5 life sentences for murders unrelated to Adam's case. His body is claimed by no one. He is buried at a state prison cemetery. His niece tells John Walsh he confessed on his deathbed. He said he killed Adam. 1997. John Walsh publishes Tears of Rage, a book that is part memoir, part furious indictment of the Hollywood Police Department's handling of the case. The police are not happy. The wounds between the Walsh family and the department deepen. 2006, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act is signed into law, expanding the National Sex Offender Registry and establishing new protections for children. 2007, a new Hollywood police chief, Chad Wagner, takes over the department and launches a fresh review of the entire case file. 2008, 27 years after Adam Walsh disappeared from a shopping mall on a summer morning. Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner calls a press conference. December 16, 2008. It is a Wednesday. A grey winter morning in Hollywood, Florida. The press conference room is packed with cameras and reporters. John and Revé Walsh are seated at a table, flanked by their other children Adam never got to grow up with. Revé is holding a small photograph of her son. She places it on the podium. Hollywood Police Chief Chadwick Wagner stands at a microphone and says the words that a family has been waiting 27 years to hear. The case is closed. Otis Toole killed Adam Walsh. Wagner says it plainly, his department had devoted too much time pursuing other suspects and not enough time focusing on the man who had always been their most credible lead. He says the review of the case file left no doubt. He apologizes. He apologizes to John and Revé Walsh for the investigative mistakes that derailed the case in its early years. For the lost evidence. For the years of uncertainty. For the failure of an institution that should have protected their son, and should have, at minimum, preserved the evidence that would have answered their questions decades sooner. And then John Walsh speaks. Who could take a 6-year-old and murder and decapitate him? Who? He says, his voice still carrying the grief of 27 years, raw, undiminished, impossible to look away from. We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know. He pauses. The not knowing has been a torture. But that journey's over. Revé Walsh does not speak for long. She doesn't need to. She sets the photograph of Adam on the podium, in front of the microphones, so that every camera in the room captures him. Her boy. 6 years old forever. She wants the world to see his face one more time. I need to be honest with you about something. The case was closed. Otis Toole was named as Adam's killer. The Hollywood Police Department is satisfied. John Walsh is satisfied. But there is no DNA proof. There will never be DNA proof. The evidence that could have provided it was lost, destroyed, or degraded. The suspect died in 1996. His body is buried at a state prison cemetery. What the investigation rests on is this: an extensive review of the case file that pointed, according to investigators, to Toole and Toole alone. A witness who independently described the dented bumper on his car. A deathbed confession to his niece. Details in his confessions that matched autopsy findings. Physical evidence, clothing items matching Adam's description, found at his home. And the absence of any credible alternative. The Hollywood police chief said it plainly. Otis Toole has continued to be our only real suspect. Is there room for doubt? Technically, yes. There is always room for doubt when there is no DNA. But doubt and truth are not the same thing. And what the evidence, in its totality, suggests, what every investigator who has reviewed it carefully has concluded, is that on July 27, 1981, a drifter named Otis Toole saw a 6-year-old boy standing alone outside a Sears department store, and made a decision that destroyed a family, traumatized a nation, and set off a chain of events whose reverberations are still being felt today. Here is what Adam Walsh's death changed. Before 1981, when a child went missing in America, local police handled it, usually slowly, usually without national coordination, usually without the tools or the urgency the situation demanded. After Adam, everything shifted. The faces on milk cartons, that started with Adam's case. The National Missing Children's Hotline, that is Adam. The fingerprinting programs that ran through millions of American elementary schools in the 1980s and 90s, that is Adam. The National Sex Offender Registry, that is Adam. The FBI's requirement to track missing children in its national database, that is Adam. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which has helped recover more than 370,000 missing children since its founding, that is Adam. Every Amber Alert that has interrupted your phone and maybe, in that interruption, led to a child being found alive, the infrastructure that makes that possible, that is Adam. The cultural shift in America's understanding of stranger danger, of predators, of the vulnerability of children in public spaces, that is Adam. One 6-year-old boy. One terrible morning in a Florida mall. And a father who decided, in his grief and his fury, that if this happened to Adam, it must never happen to another child if he could help it. John Walsh helped law enforcement capture more than 1,100 dangerous fugitives through his television work alone. Dozens of missing children were recovered because of the systems he helped build. The Adam Walsh legacy is measured not in years but in children alive who might not have been. It is the most extraordinary transformation of grief into purpose that I have ever encountered. Adam Walsh disappeared into a world that was not equipped to find him. A world where the FBI didn't track missing children. Where local police handled national crises with local tools. Where evidence could be lost without consequence and cases could drift for years without accountability. He disappeared into a gap, a systemic, structural gap, between the protection children deserved and the protection the system offered. That gap was not the product of malice. It was the product of neglect. Of assumption. Of a society that had not yet reckoned with the reality that predators like Otis Toole existed, and moved through public spaces, and could take a child in the time it took a mother to look at a lamp. Adam's death forced a reckoning. It was brutal and unfair and entirely at the expense of one small boy and his inconsolable parents. But it happened. And John and Revé Walsh made a choice that I think deserves to be named as one of the most heroic acts in the recent history of this country, to take that reckoning and do something with it. They could have retreated. They could have hidden. Grief that profound would have broken most people. It nearly broke John Walsh. He said so himself. But they got up. And because they got up, children are alive today. That is not a metaphor. That is not a platitude. That is a fact. Children are alive today because a 6-year-old boy from Hollywood, Florida, did not come home from a shopping M. His name was Adam. He had sandy blonde hair and a smile that made the room brighter. He loved baseball. He loved the water. He loved his parents more than anything. He was 6 years old on a Monday morning in July, and he went to a mall with his mother, and he found some kids playing a video game, and he played with them for a little while because he was 6 and that was what you did. And then a security guard told the kids to leave, and Adam went outside, and a man named Otis Toole saw him standing alone. Adam Walsh never came home. His body was never found. There is no grave where his parents could go to sit with him. No physical place where his life is marked. There is only what he left behind. Which is, it turns out, quite a lot. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The Missing Children Act. The Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. The National Sex Offender Registry. The faces on milk cartons and the Amber Alerts on your phone and the fingerprint cards in elementary schools and the missing child databases that law enforcement agencies now treat as routine. All of it is Adam. All of it is a 6-year-old boy who loved baseball and the water and his parents. All of it is the proof that one life, no matter how brief, no matter how violently ended, can reverberate through history in ways that save lives for generations. His parents needed to know what happened to him. They spent 27 years not knowing. And when they finally knew, when John Walsh stood at a microphone in Hollywood, Florida, and said the words "the not knowing has been a torture, but that journey's over," he was not just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every parent who has ever stood in a store and looked around and not seen their child. For every family that has waited by a phone that did not ring. For everyone who has ever held a photograph and talked to it, in the dark, and hoped. For Adam. Always for Adam.